So welcome to today's virtual talk, Ahead of Her Time, Marcia Resnick in the Art World. This engaging conversation will include the role of artists and gallerists in the promotion of artworks, background on Marcia's career, and conversations surrounding the ins and outs of the art world. My name is Eliza Kozlowski. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Engagement here at the Eastman Museum in Rochester. The George Eastman Museum resides within the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill, known in English as the Seneca people. Specifically, the museum occupies lands ceded in the 1788 Phelps-Gorham Purchase, which was procured under false pretenses, duress, and coercion. We pledge to honor and better serve the Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, cultures, and experiences. And at the George Eastman Museum, we are committed to sharing and amplifying Indigenous voices and work to do so locally and internationally in our exhibitions, collections, programs, and interpretation. Again, a warm welcome to everybody in attendance today. I'm here with my colleague, Jamie Allen, the Stephen B. and Janice G. Ashley Curator and Interim Head for the Department of Photography, who will be introducing our other panelists in a moment. We invite anyone to ask questions at any point during the discussion today, which will then be read at the end of the presentation, including the Q&A. The presentation will last about an hour. And so if you have a question for our panelists, again, at the bottom or somewhere on your screen, some of you are taking advantage of it, so thank you. You should see the icon that says Q&A. There's not a chat function operating, so we apologize, but feel free to continue with the Q&A, saying hello to us. We appreciate it. Again, we're recording today's talk, so if you want to watch this again or later share with friends and colleagues, that would be greatly appreciated. The recording will appear on the Eastman Museum YouTube page within a week. So thank you. Talks like these are in thanks to our museum members and the generous donations the George Eastman Museum receives. To learn more about becoming a member and seeing the extensive collection of materials the museum has, please visit eastman.org. Now I would like to turn it over to Jamie. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, Eliza. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. What a great crowd that we have today. My name is Jamie Allen. As Eliza said, I am the Stephen B. and Janice G. Ashley Curator and Interim Head of the Department of Photography at the Eastman Museum. And I'm excited to be in conversation with these three magnificent women today as we think about the role of artists and gallerists in the promotion of artworks, particularly through the lens of Marcia Resnick's career. This conversation is in conjunction with the exhibition Marcia Resnick, as it is or could be, which will be on display at the Eastman Museum through June 11th. The exhibition was organized by the Bowdoin College Museum of Art, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and the George Eastman Museum. And I in particular want to thank my colleagues who are the exhibition curators who did just a fantastic job with their work on the exhibition and accompanying book, and congratulate them. They are Frank Goodyear, Casey Riley, and Lisa Hostetler. Thank you three for bringing this wonderful scholarship to our field. At the Eastman Museum, the exhibition is generously supported by the Rubens Family Foundation, and we thank them for their continued support. I'd now like to introduce our panelists who are going to be joining us today. First is Marcia Resnick. Marcia is a photographer who earned recognition as part of the legendary downtown New York art scene in the 1970s and 1980s, with portraits of major cultural figures such as Jean-Michel Basquiat, John Belushi, and Susan Sontag. Her books include Revisions, Punks, Poets, and Provocateurs, New York City Bad Boys, Landscape, Sea, and Tahitian Eve. In viewing and reflecting upon the artwork she created between the late 1960s and early 1980s, we see an artist who was really truly ahead of her time. Her photographs bring a pithy kind of wit to the beginnings of conceptual photography as she explores the nuances of photography and language, how photographs record time and memory, combining photographs with other media such as paint and graphite, and how to turn seemingly intrinsic concepts, such as landscape photography or portraiture, on their heads. Marcia, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Our next participant is Deborah Bell. Deborah Bell is the owner and president of Deborah Bell Photographs, located in Chelsea, New York. She has been dealing in fine art photographs since 1988, and her gallery offers a broad range of works spanning the history of photography, with a concentration on the 20th century. Some of her areas of expertise include European photography between the world wars, American photography from the 1940s through 1970s, selected fashion photography, and photo documents of conceptual art and performance. She presents innovative exhibitions and represents living photographers as well as estates. And as an experienced private dealer and gallery owner, she works closely with individuals and institutions in building collections of depth and quality. Deborah, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jamie.
Our final participant for today is Susan Herzig. Susan is the vice president at Paul M. Hertzman Incorporated in San Francisco, California, where she works with her husband and business partner, Paul Hertzman. As a gallerist and collector, Susan's specialization is in the 20th century photography, including modernism, Group F64, photojournalism, the photo succession movement, post-World War II innovations, and conceptual photography from the 1970s and 80s. It's probably where Marcia fits in. With more than 40 years of experience buying and selling vintage photographs, she brings a deep knowledge of the art market and connoisseurship that is shared with museums, private collectors, and colleagues. Susan, I'm so glad to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start a presentation. While we're in conversation today, I'm just going to be running some of Marcia's work in the background so that everybody can see it, because I think it's important to get to see that work. So today we're going to start off, Marcia, just in case somebody wasn't familiar with your work. I wanted to start off by kind of introducing some of what you were trying to accomplish in your early career. So I'll just say that Marcia received degrees from the Cooper Union in New York City in 1972, and also from the California Institute of Arts in 1973. I'm just wondering if maybe, Marcia, you can speak a little bit about how you approached art making in the 1970s and what you felt you were trying to accomplish through your art.
Well, I had to first convince myself that I was still making art when I just pressed a button on my camera. So I painted on my photographs, first with bright opaque colors, sort of like color by number, looking like that. And I wanted to create a play between people and their environments. Then I became fascinated with the idea of painting black and white on black and white to show like opaque areas of the photograph juxtaposed to the black and white photographic grain.
And I think this man in Mexico that we're sharing here is a good example of that.
Yeah. It seemed to places recede and come forward because of the opacity suddenly on the grainy photograph. It's lovely to see. Then I became intrigued by John Baldessari's concept of post-studio art. And I began to sequence my photographs into books, self-published books, with the help of a grant, of course. Galleries and museums catered to an elite audience. Books were the most democratic way to share my art. That's from C. These are from C. A book.
Yeah, and C was one of your early books that you put together.
Self-published.
So one of the main things I wanted to talk about today was really how different the photographic art market is today as compared to the 1970s. In the 1970s, if others aren't familiar with that, that's really when the photographic art market starts taking off. And we really start to see photographic specific galleries enter the art market. So Marcia, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you earned, or shall I say perhaps didn't earn, a living at being a photographer in the 1970s. How did you share your work? And, I know that most artists during that period were not really able to support themselves through selling their work. So, there's very few opportunities to get representation at that time. There's very few galleries. The market's really new. So how did you support your art making in the 1970s?
Well, I made a living as an adjunct lecturer in 7 different colleges in the New York City area. And I also was a substitute teacher in the New York City public school system. I also did graphic design and illustration. And then I created my own niche at the Soho News when I created Resnick's Believe It or Not. But these were all pretty low-paying jobs. The rents in New York City were much lower. The standard of living was so different then. I could work 1 day a week and make enough money to support my apartment. But I didn't work 1 day a week. I started to work in all of those different colleges at the same time. So I'd be in Queens 1 day, I'd be in Staten Island another day. So I just did whatever I could to make a living, but I did stuff that gave me pleasure. I didn't want to work in an office. I did work in an office when I did some design work, but I tried to just be my own freewheeling self.
Were you able to share your work in any particular venues at that time? I know that, several of your works were in exhibitions. The Eastman Museum had an exhibition in the 70s, but where would people have run into your work?
Well, I tried to get my work around. I showed my work in any place that asked me to, in group shows everywhere. There were group shows in Washington, in Aspen, Colorado, etc. And I also went to SPE conventions, Society for Photographic Education. And I remember I was the first person to actually bring my work to an SPE convention and put it in the big hallway on the floor and stand next to it.
Which is now what everybody does.
Now, yeah, you walk through and you see all these different people with their stuff, with their wares. But I was the first one.
I wonder if you found being a teacher beneficial to your career in any way. I feel like the exchange of ideas between students and educators can be so important.
Well, it's funny, teaching in college is you more or less tell stories, you talk at the students. And teaching in high school is different from that. You're supposed to elicit from the students, elicit information. And all of those kinds of behaviors, talking to, eliciting from, play a part in a regular photo session. That kind of give and take that you have in a photo session with one or many people who you're photographing. So it helped me. And also doing my work informed my teaching. Yeah, definitely. I liked teaching. That was also something that, not every, when you have a teacher that doesn't want to be there.
Well, and particularly, I know you taught high school students, and that's not always an age that everybody wants to deal with. So You know,
Substitute, I would do handwriting analysis, and they all would stay in my classroom because they thought I was some kind of soothsayer. That I could read their fortune, and they were all excited when I was the substitute. So that was fun.
you were the cool substitute teacher.
Yeah.
Well, so I do want to get our conversation rolling on kind of the role of art dealers and gallerists, because it's such a vital role in a current art market, in a thriving art market, I should say. But I don't think that many people really understand the role and what gallerists and art dealers really do. So I'm wondering, Deborah and Susan, if you wanted to talk a little bit about how you view your role as an art dealer or gallerist, and if you can kind of speak towards what you think you bring to the community as a gallerist or art dealer. Either of you can
Deborah,
start.
do you want to go first?
I think you should, Susan. You were the one who discovered Marcia's work, so I think.
Okay. Well, first of all, yes, thank you to Jamie and to the whole George Eastman team for organizing this event, and to the curators who put together this magnificent show, which I did get to see at Bowdoin College last year, right around this time. I mean, there are some obvious functions that an art dealer has that we all know. I mean, exhibiting, promoting the work of an artist is clearly the bread and butter of the art dealer's function. But I think the art dealer is far more than merely a business person. I think most art dealers are very passionate about the art they deal in. And the best way to feed that passion is through discovering new artists and their work. And that could be artists in the past, historically overlooked figures, or contemporary artists who are working today. And there's nothing like that thrill of discovery, which is, I can tell you that for sure. And I would say that that kind of discovery is a huge part of what makes the art market vibrant and keeps it going.
I wonder, that makes me think, like, how do you discover new artists? Where are you searching for people?
Well, much of it is serendipity, as is the case in discovering Marcia's work. And it's really hard to be very specific about that. I think you have to sort of be open-minded to what you see, be open-minded to what you haven't seen before. And I would say that certainly in my career working with Paul, discovering work and bringing it to market has been a big part of what we've done, and certainly been the most rewarding part of what we've done.
Deborah, do you want to comment at all on your role as an art dealer and gallerist, and what that brings to our community?
Well, I think that Susan expressed everything so eloquently, and I agree with everything she said. And I would just say that it ends up really being the work for love, what we do, because a lot of the time we really don't know what's going to happen when we present something that we are excited about. But I think that the goal is to offer work that we think is illuminating and important culturally and aesthetically, and should be known, in our opinion. And as Susan said, it's something that you have to feel excited about. And when you're excited about something, you sort of just can't wait to show it. And so it's dangerous, but also very exhilarating.
Well, I think that excitement comes through when you're speaking to people about an artist's work, and that really gets people intrigued and emotionally involved. I'm thinking we should talk a little bit about how and when you all came to represent Marcia's work. So, now your two galleries Deborah Bell Photographs and Paul M. Hertzman Incorporated represent Marcia's work. How did that come about though, and when did that come about?
Well, I would say, I'm not sure of the exact year that we, quote, discovered Marcia's work, perhaps
2008, I think it was, Susan, 2008.
was it 15 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it was a case, as I mentioned earlier, of serendipity. Paul and I were visiting a photographer based here in San Francisco, Charles Gatewood, who is deceased now, but Charles had a lot of work by other photographers in his home. And there was one picture by Marcia that was kind of propped up on a shelf somewhere. And it's one of the images from Revisions. And if Deborah
Yes.
wants to hold up the
I'll
the
stop the
image,
share so that you can see it a little bit bigger.
this is
Everyone.
the first photograph we ever saw by Marcia. And of course it was captioned, so we immediately found ourselves laughing.
Do you want to
and,
read the caption?
Yes, I can read it, and it's right in front of me. So she was repeatedly told to stop looking at her feet while in the company of adults.
And so we asked Charles, who is this person? Who is Marcia Resnick? It was a signed print. And he said a few things, but he had lost track of Marcia. He didn't know where she was, although he suspected it was New York City. In those days, we still had phone books. So somebody, I don't know if it was Paul or I or Deborah. We contacted Deborah because we've worked with Deborah on a lot of other projects. We had worked on a lot of other projects with her before this. So we contacted her and asked her to see if she could track Marcia down. And sure enough, Marcia was in the phone book and she was just a phone call away. Yeah. And that's the discovery story. After that, we contacted her and we visited her, and that was the beginning of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was like in my very late 50s. I had to wait a long time before getting really discovered.
So what did that do for you in your career? Did having representation and having somebody to do that kind of business end of your representation, I mean, I would like to think that obviously that helps you, but what did that do for you in your career?
It completely it catapulted me into the public eye again. I also was able to, my income was helped by selling photographs for the first time. And I mean, I had sold some photographs over the years, but I was never represented by a gallery. And so, having that kind of income, I didn't have to do other kinds of work that were distasteful to me. Gave me freedom to pursue, and those projects that were close to my heart, and it was wonderful. I finally got my book published, Bad Boys.
Bad Boys, yeah.
That was in 2016. Actually, it's Punks, Poets, and Provocateurs.
Would you like me to hold up the cover, Jamie?
Yeah, if you want.
Okay. I can't see whether it's showing or not, but
You're doing great.
Okay, good.
It's got a nice picture of John Belushi there on the front.
Big, make her
big.
Yeah, make us big. So hold it up higher, higher, higher. Okay.
For those of you in the audience, the book really is a who's who of the New York City art and culture scene, and just really fantastic, engaging portraits that Marcia made of all these, in this case, men, which I love, Marcia, that you were approaching that from a stance of as a woman photographer, photographing men, when most of the photographers who were photographing people at the time were female or were male photographers, but and a lot of it was photographing women, right? So kind of turning that, again, turning something on its head. Do you want to talk a little bit about that since we're here?
Sure. I had just come from trip to Egypt, where all the women walked behind the men, and I had met someone on the boat. I took a boat from Greece to Alexandria, and he was Egyptian, and he took me around to different places, but I had to wear all black, long black skirt, and anyway, it just reminded me, being there reminded me of the fact that there's a big difference between how the world as it was, with men having all the power. And so I just wanted to, I felt powerful when I was taking pictures. I was isolating things in the world that were meaningful to me, in these rectangles, 35 millimeter rectangles. And so to move my gaze onto men and just see what that kind of conversation was like on a one-to-one sort of basis. And I got to select the men. I was working in Soho News, so I got a lot of entree. I was able to suggest people that they do an article about this person or that person that I wanted to photograph for what I called Bad Boys. That was the name of my project. And
you were working on those for like Soho Weekly News and Rolling Stone and other publications?
And then I was working on that for me. It was always in my mind a book.
I see.
And I the way it worked out was that I started with the punks, who were not really necessarily bad boys, but they were in the face of society. And then my friend Victor Bachris introduced me to William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg, and he wrote the text for the book. And the actual whole movement of the books is how the Beats influenced the punks. That was like what turned out to be the theme in a way. Anyway, after I photographed just those people who were close to me, music people, etc., I expanded my gaze to all men who were influential in some way or other, whether as being a writer or a director or a filmmaker or a painter. So the book is divided into 3 parts: punks, poets are the Beats, and provocateurs are all the enfants terribles in all other arenas. So Jean-Michel Basquiat, painter, Charles Ludlam of the Ridiculous Theatrical Company. He had like this face that was made of putty. A lot of these people are no longer alive, but that was that. Andy Warhol. My favorite image, or one of my favorite images, is of the remaining 4 Beats. William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, Peter Orlovsky, and Gregory Court. And getting those 4 enormous personalities into one little package, photographing the rock group. The contact sheet was very funny. Somebody would always do something crazy or leave the picture or whatever. But one picture, it was one roll of film, one picture was perfect. And John Belushi is another person who I did a major photo session with. And Johnny Thunders has a chapter. The 2 Johns, Johnny Thunders and John Belushi, have their own chapters. Okay.
For me, that's really fascinating that you had this idea, that you were executing in the late 70s and 80s, early 80s, and really gathering these things, but that you didn't get to produce it until much later. And part of that comes because of, again, this idea that you have representation and it frees up your time. You're now able to concentrate on the products that you want to, or projects, I should say, that you want to produce and do. Susan and Deborah, can you talk a little bit about what it is that you do for artists to get their work out in the world and how you promote them?
Well, I think part of what we do is obviously we show work at art fairs, the art fairs that we do. In my case, now that I've had a gallery for a fairly long time, I do exhibitions. But I think another thing is it's not automatic that people notice and maybe absorb all this work just if you have it on your wall. I think that a large part of our job is still involves elbow grease, calling people, and especially the museum curators. They're really busy, and I think it's important to let them know we've got this. We think you might be interested in it, and just spreading the word that way. It's not always if you build it, they will come. You have to also be very proactive, and that's fun. So
that's good that it's fun. And you do that for collectors as well, right? I mean, you probably have people that that are collectors that are interested in certain areas or certain kinds of work, that when you see something that you think you could connect them to, that's part of your role as well.
Exactly, yes. And sometimes you're wrong, but also it can take a long time too for interest to develop. And because there's so much people are seeing, there's so much around. And I think a lot of great things, maybe they don't hit you in the head right away or in the eyes, but they grow on you. And I think it's better to have work grow on you than grow off you. So it's fine if it takes some time.
Yeah, I find if I keep thinking about something that I've seen, the longer I think about it and the more that it stays present in my mind, the more I want to go out in the world and bring it to, the collection or show it or share it, learn more about it. The things that anchor into my head are the things I want to bring to the world.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is connoisseurship and really thinking about what that is and teaching people how to be connoisseurs of photographs and how they can develop their own kind of knowledge of photographic processes and the history and who the artists are and how everything fits together. Do the two of you want to speak a little bit about like what connoisseurship is and how you help develop that for your clients?
Susan, would you like to start this time?
Okay, I'll take a stab at it. When you threw this question out to us earlier, Jamie, I thought, well, I know what it is. And then I thought,
it's not
well,
easy to explain.
It's not easy to explain. So of course I did the Google search to see what other people had said, which didn't actually help me all that much, but it was an interesting exercise. But I mean, there are certain elements to developing connoisseurship, certain things you probably people do when they in the process of becoming a connoisseur, if you will. First of all, you have to look at an enormous amount of work in whatever medium you've chosen to focus on, or mediums plural. And certainly Deborah and I and our colleagues over the years, we've looked at so much work that is, that's the foundation of our connoisseurship, I think. It's also important, I think, to understand how the artist or a body of work fits into art history, how it fits into the contemporary art world, so that it has context. I would say reading about the work or the artist is important. Just learning as much as you can. And I would also say, for someone who's, a collector who wants to develop that kind of connoisseurship, I think it's important to have a good relationship with several dealers whom you trust, who will teach you a lot. And frequently, I think they have more time to do that than most museum curators do. And they have the time to do it on a one-to-one basis. So that kind of sums it up for me.
Yeah, like I love when I'm at a fair or come to somebody's gallery and I really get to know much more about an artist's work, because your brains are so encyclopedic about what it is that you're talking about, right? You can really bring to light all these great connections and place it very quickly for somebody who's familiar with the photographic history. But I think also, somebody who's just walking up off the street at an art fair, you can probably do the same for them as well. So it's what a service that we have, and having that knowledge base in our community. Did you want to respond at all, Deborah, or do you feel like Susan covered it there?
Oh, I think Susan covered it beautifully. I would just add that I was going to say all the same things pretty much, but I think that another important aspect of photography is training your eye about the physical qualities of various prints and appreciating their nuances, because I think the marriage of craft and subject matter, the way an artist puts them together, is really crucial. And I think artists like Marcia know how the images are going to come across the strongest in the most powerful way, or what little subtleties a certain way of choice of paper or development or contrast, all those things that all that fun stuff in photography that I think it takes time to develop a knowledge about. That's part of the connoisseurship of photography too. You might not have to or be able to define them all, but the collector, the connoisseur starts to be a sort of unconscious vocabulary that you're using, or it's you can tell, you start to understand also what you like as time goes on.
Yeah, maybe a possible example of that is if we're looking at the works that are on the screen right now, the idea that it's full frame. So you see the full 35mm frame, and that, and I'll go back to this one because you can see the sprocket holes for the film at the top. And that to me places it in a very specific time, a very specific function. It's really drawing on this idea that like, this is unmanipulated, right? There's this full frame, you're seeing the whole thing. I'm not doing anything to it. I'm not cropping. I'm not playing with you. But then Marcia's pushing that because she is playing with us, because she's putting so much oil paints on these particular photographs to really change what it is that we're looking at and seeing. So I think of dodging and burning and all those different elements that really change how we can see a photograph. And I know Marcia had said that the William Burroughs image, for instance, that there was somebody else in the background of that image that she just took out by burning it in the darkroom, and like knowing that our eyes will be able to focus then on some other subject when you do that, and leading us in that way really makes beautiful, beautiful prints. And knowing as a person looking at things, what it is that you're looking at is also fantastic.
Mhm.
I really want to address kind of the changes in the art world that happened between the 70s and today. And I, because of my age, didn't get to experience all of that. But I'm curious what you've noticed about how the photographic art market has changed over the last 40 or 50 years. What changes in how we approach purchasing and selling art have happened?
Deborah,
Oh,
take a
thank you.
stab.
Okay, Susan. Susan and Paul have been dealers much longer than I have, but I was in the background for a long time before I became a dealer, going to the fairs, going to the galleries, and I think the most obvious thing is that contemporary work, well, what we now is to us as contemporary work is dominating the market. But when I started to, when I moved to New York in 1978, and then I started to go to all these shows and fairs and everything, there was, I mean, the discovery period for photography was in full swing. And so there were tranches of 19th century photographs coming, surfacing, and all sorts of other big estates being excavated, and many photographers were still alive too, who are now our the heroes and heroines of classical photography. So I think that's what I always kind of refer to as the discovery period. Has there's not as much evidence of that anymore, because the work has gone into private and public collections, and it's so much more scarce. So and then of course the field has just burgeoned. So and we could talk all day about that, I think.
Yeah, just what it takes to own something that's a historic image or a contemporary image. Definitely. Marcia, I wanted to get to your current work, and we have about 7 questions. So I want to leave some good amount of time for questions as well. But let me get to more recent work that you've been working on. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about your more current bodies of work that you've been doing?
Well, during the pandemic, I found my old Patty Playpal doll from like 1959. And
Is it in this picture?
yes, it's the little one, that one. Of course, she's wearing the famous Patty Playpal dress still, but I changed her shoes and socks, and her hair was all natty. And, I washed her hair and put it in little ponytails to look like me. And started playing with her, I guess. I didn't play with dolls that much, I don't think, when I was younger. I was always drawing. But in my adult life, dolls have, sort of been intriguing to me. Like, if you want to go back to the poster. The poster, that, yeah. I did that when I was at Cooper Union. I answered an ad. I was always looking for jobs. And I answered an ad for thinkers and problem solvers that was on the bulletin board. And it was an advertising company that was just looking for cheap labor, basically. And the WCBS FM radio put out some really great posters, by Peter Max and the Milton Glaser people, Pushpin Studio people, and I got to do a poster for WCBS radio. Of course, they didn't let me take the final photograph. They used a professional photographer, but I actually built the radio and created the image and the concept. Anyway, it was in the middle of the women's liberation, and those posters were all over the subways, and a lot of angry libbers wrote all over it. They thought it was demeaning to women.
Well, it's interesting because one of the questions that I was just looking at is, can you talk about your work and life during the emerging women's movement of the 1970s?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I got my first my job opportunities after grad school. I had a lot of possibilities. Of course, I chose New York City. So I started at Queens College, teaching at Queens College. But all of the universities wanted women because there weren't any, especially in photography. So, I really owe a lot to the women's liberation movement, which I wasn't really embraced by at the time when Revisions was published. Revisions is a woman, it's not just a woman's book, but it's a very telling book about what it's like to be a woman and grow up and be a teenager and deal with all the foibles and of adolescence. Anyway, the women's movement now is more like how I experienced the women's movement then. I guess it's not as rigid political in a way. Of course, there are women's marches, and when they do horrible things to us, like take away our rights to handle our own bodies, then everybody gets political again. It's very, that's all very distressing. The world is very distressing. How history repeats itself is ridiculous. I mean, having a linear historical perspective of the world is important as an artist. Who wants to make photographic statements that have already been made by someone else? Of course, whenever a different person sees the world and takes pictures, they're going to be looking at the world differently. You can't really make the same kind of photograph as somebody else did. But there are themes. And anyway, the women's movement now embraces revisions. Revision
now does. It's been revised.
Yeah, it's been, revisions, revisualizations, and revised. I revised a few. They're all true, except I sometimes juice them up to make them more exciting. So it's really, I'm happy to be finally embraced. Can you keep these up for a little longer so people can read them?
For those of you who aren't familiar with the Resnicks, believe it or not, these were, I'm just going to go to the second one here. These were published in Soho Weekly News. And in this case, Marcia made images she took images that she already had in her kind of photographic arsenal and made stories about them. And the stories are very, very funny, in my opinion.
I lied in every single one of these, believe it or not. I made up. Some people really believed them.
But we shouldn't, because it's not. Yeah. So
They sound like they could be true. Sorry.
there's always a little something fantastical about it that takes you somewhere else. One of the questions that's in our chat right now is kind of, can we talk about the difference between the photo market and the larger fine art market? And I think this is just like a problem for photography throughout its entire history. Is it art? Is it not art? Can it be art? Can it not be art? And I think probably, you know, nowadays there's a huge portion of the photo market that overlaps with the fine art market. But can you talk a little bit about the difference between the photo market and the fine art market?
Well, I think whatever differences there are actually narrowing. There was a time where they were two distinct markets, but now more than ever, galleries who show all sorts of mediums show photography. And they never would have done that 30 years ago or 40 years ago. When you see the big galleries, the David Zwirners of the world, the Gagosians, those kinds of galleries embracing photography, that is a signal that I think that photography has been completely accepted as a legitimate art form, whereas previously there was always an argument about that.
And I think also the fact that we've taken photographs that were made for very specific purposes, you know, documentation of the American West, and turned them into art photographs essentially in our histories, kind of also proves that those things have risen to an aesthetic value as opposed to a document value. Really takes photography into that kind of realm of fine art. Another question is,
can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
No,
please. I just wanted to say that I think it's still challenging selling photography because of the connoisseurship issue. I should say we have many colleagues who are beginning to show other mediums, especially painting. And I hear all the time that it's so much easier to sell paintings. And with photography, there are so many little differences and aspects. And, you know, I think you have to really love photography and love all those little things that you have to make decisions about, because otherwise it's still intimidating in some ways, and it can be discouraging because people may not know, well, you know, if they think if there are other prints, how do I know I should buy this one? So I think it's still easier to sell a unique object.
And I think in some cases that was what makes Marcia's work so easy, right? It's like some of them are very much unique objects. This thing only exists as it is because she hand wrote on it or painted on it. Whereas that idea of kind of like editioning, which came into being, you know, like, and I know very few photographers who are good at editioning. They might put an edition number on there, but did they actually make all of those editions? And again, that's part of connoisseurship, right? Is knowing how an artist editioned or didn't edition their work. One of the questions in the chat, Marcia, is did you print your own photos in the darkroom? And if so, do you still do that?
Well, I haven't been, you know, I've been taking digital pictures in the last several years. And I don't have my darkroom anymore, but I did print my pictures. I learned everything about the darkroom. In fact, I taught a course at Cal Arts called it was a 3-semester course, Fun with Photography, Son of Fun with Photography, and the Return of Son of Fun with Photography. And it was a photographic techniques course, you know, blueprints, gum prints, etc. I spent a lot of time in the darkroom learning how to print. And eventually, when I had a loft and my own beautiful big darkroom, I had assistants who I taught to print the way that I wanted them to print. So all of my vintage prints were not printed by me. They were printed by assistants overseen by me. And printing sort of lost its, I mean, at first printing photographs is so exciting. Seeing them come up in the developer, etc. But it can get tedious, and doing something over and over again to make it right is what one had to do.
Yeah, the craft of photography is so important in that sense. And I know that some people feel that inkjet has made people lose that craft in some way.
Well,
now that we're digitally printing.
There's a lot of photography in Photoshop. I mean, I use my photographic skills. The skills from the darkroom apply to Photoshop. However, I'm not proficient at Photoshop. It's still good. There's just so much to learn. And my sister is a graphic designer, and when I'm having problems, real problems with working in Photoshop, I always have to call her. Sometimes she'll do something for me. For example, in the next picture of she put the New York City police thing into the photograph.
So I feel like we only have a couple minutes left here. This conversation has gone very fast, as they always do. So thank you all for participating and being part of this conversation today. And I'm sorry that we couldn't get to everybody's questions, but I tried to get to as many as I could. But there's one final question that, there must be a story behind this picture. So can you tell us a little bit about the story behind your mugshot and then your recreation of it with your pandemic doll?
I got arrested. They had a search warrant for my apartment, and I really still to this day don't know how they got that or why. They found some pills that my mother had given me, like Libriums, from my mother's prescription, which was illegal because you're not supposed to give people your prescriptions. So they were looking for something, and they couldn't find. They thought that my roommate's food, she was macrobiotic, was maybe pot or something. They looked at her food, and it looked like something illegal about this food. Anyway, they found this vial of white powder on my shelf, and I couldn't remember what it was. So they said it was in excess of 1/8 of an ounce of heroin. So I got arrested for that. And my parents got a divorce attorney for me. So, he said, plead guilty. So I had to plead guilty. And then I got this thing called Youth Counsel Bureau, where I was like on probation for 6 months. And then they wiped my record clean, and they sent me the negatives to my mugshots. Which is how
that's the part that's crazy right there. And then I love that you've recreated it with one of your pandemic dolls.
Yeah, I saw this dress on eBay, and I said something about this dress. I felt compelled to buy it, and I put it on the doll, and then I went, oh my God. Just go back again. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's just like, go back again. So anyway, just one of those things.
Well, Marcia, I certainly look forward to seeing what comes of your pandemic dolls and all of the interesting kind of ways that you can photograph them as well. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Deborah Bell and Susan Hertzman, for joining us, and Marcia. It's been wonderful to hear your stories and just be a part of this exhibition in that way. So thank you all for helping us better understand kind of where we are in the art world today and where we've come from. And hopefully we'll get some more new in the future too.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you
Yes,
all.
thank you, Marcia.
Deborah.
I know we're getting a lot of thanks and great and thank you and lots of hellos to all of you. We're in the chat and the questions as well, just so you know. We'll stick around here just a few more minutes to let people add in what they wanted to in the chat. But that is the end of our program. And Deborah, I'll say that Janice Hahn and Virginia Dodier both said hello, and Susan Penny Rubinoff from Miami said hello to you as well. I did catch those at some point.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining and coming to watch. This has been so much fun.
Stop share so it's just us.
Oh, so we can look at all the Q&As.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we still have some, hi all, we still have some people that are on that are all, so thanks again for everybody from joining. And yeah, and I was monitoring, so there's some other comments that maybe Jamie, you didn't see that I cut and pasted into so I can share with you all. But thank you all. And for anybody who's still on, just take a look at our websites for some future talks. And as I said, this video will be on in about a week, so you can share it with others or watch it again. All right, unfortunately, it doesn't allow us to end it for participants and just keep on panelists. So, but
Okay.
yeah, Marcia, Deborah, and Susan, thank you so much. Jamie, wonderful, great job.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
all.
Everyone.
Yes, thank
All
you, Marcia. You spoke so beautifully. You were great.
Ew.
It was great, wonderful stories, and I wish we could have gone longer. It was great.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for
Bye.
having us.
Leaving.
Thank you.